Alright guys, I think this will take a few moments. But the first part of my talk, I won't need a computer, so I'll start with the presentation. There's been a fair bit of doom and gloom today, and there's been a few references to Margaret Mead. Can you put your hand up if you have a rough idea who she is? And cool. For the rest of you who are not that familiar with her, one of my favorite quotes of her is that, never forget that a small group can change the world. Never disbelieve that. It's pretty much the only thing that ever has. Just keep that in mind. Now, there's one thing I want you to take away from my presentation today, which is at the core of my research. To evolve human-like behavior, create conditions that are required to develop. Now, the first thing I'd like to do is kind of set the context of why I want to develop AI. What's the point of building robots? There's been a lot of talk today about the far future of robots, whereas I'm at the very beginning, the current robotics. Now, why should we build robots now? Why shouldn't we wait until we've solved all these problems? Okay. My answer is, I don't believe the world should be the way it is right now. I don't think that people should do the things that they should not have to do. My dad, he gets up at 3, 6 days a week to drive a truck. And the rest of the time, he spends fixing. My mum spends her working life in factories. Sorry, I'm getting a bit shaky. And she recently retired because she got diagnosed with cancer. And I talked to a homeless man down the road at Melbourne Central Station. And he told me that in Melbourne, there are 6 social service groups. And from each of them, you get a week of housing. And the rest of the time, you're on your own. If you want more government services, you have to have a house. It's as simple as that. It's fallen through the cracks. I recently spoke to a person who develops robots, and he visited a developing country, a third world country. And I'm nervous. Alright. And he met some of the locals there, and they were really surprised that he wanted to develop robots. They couldn't see the point. You know, it's cheap to get a person to wash the toilets, because there's a cost group for that. And I was shocked. That kind of blows my mind. Then again, a few weeks ago, I arrived at my uni at 5 o'clock in the morning, trying to get some work done, but I left really late. And for the first time, I saw the cleaners there. And you can guess their economic background, their social background. We see them all the time, or rather we don't. They're all around us. We don't hear them, we don't think of them, we don't remember them. Okay, now there's been a lot of other solutions brought today about, it's not technology we need social change. That's fair enough. We produce more food than we need, and we don't share it. We destroy it because we can't sell it. We force countries suffering from starvation to pay international debt. Now, I don't know how we're going to change the way people think. At the same time, I don't want to be a person campaigning for change. It's not my thing. I don't want to be an insider trying to make compromises in these organizations that have the power. I don't know how to change the way people think yet, but I do have my own plan of action. Yeah, so that's kind of my motivation for spending all these years trying to look at robots, look at AI, and kind of form my own path. So, if you want to create a robot that is capable of human-like behavior, more than what we can do now, what are your options? Okay, there's a couple of really amazing projects going on right now. The Blue Brain Project, the China Brain Project, formerly led by Dr. Hugo, and the Embodiments project, just to name a few. Okay. My talk is about a much simpler idea. What if, instead of scanning and modeling a biological brain, what if instead of programming a cognitive architecture with an immense knowledge database, which takes years and years. For example, Psych, one of the largest knowledge bases ever made, it's been in production for 20 years, with millions of dollars spent. What if instead of trying to build a huge brain with massive amounts of neurons, we did something different? Okay. What if we try to create human-like behaviors by creating conditions that require them to evolve? Now, by human-like behaviors, I mean, imagine a group of robots with human-like bodies in a challenging environment. Okay. What sort of human-like behaviors I'm looking for is the kind of behaviors that they have to exhibit to survive in that environment. Now, why human-like behavior? Now this morning, Mike Georgia spoke about the multi-agent systems, or the BDI stuff. When I was in my undergraduate, I studied that, and I kept on scratching my head. It just didn't make sense to me. The BDI stuff, the multi-agent stuff, still requires the programmer to spend a lot of time structuring the problem in a way that the computer can understand. And there's a huge knowledge bottleneck that you have to get into the computer. The computer has no way to determine relevance unless you structure a small box and tell it exactly what's relevant. A robot, an AI, the type I'm looking for, that won't cut it. So that's why human-like behaviors is my focus. Alright, so how do we create human-like behaviors, a condition which requires human-like behaviors to evolve? Alright. My approach is to create a simulation. Starting myself so I can face myself. Alright, so in this simulation, you have a group of robots in a physical world, in a three-dimensional world. They need to find food to eat, and they need to find others to reproduce. If they don't eat, they starve and die. It's that simple. If they don't reproduce, eventually the whole population dies. Now, in order to survive, they have to work together. They need to learn to move, take care of their bodies, to raise their children, talk, to learn about themselves, the world, and each other. And what we've found so far is that to manage to develop really advanced behaviors, they can find food, they can reproduce, they can walk, they can hunt, evade predators, and so on. But that's in a rather basic world. So what we're going to do over time is to make these worlds more detailed, more realistic. We can give the robots bodies that develop, for example. So they can start as a small robot, kind of like a child, and then grow up. But this is something that we can only do in simulations because the technology in robotics is not available. At the same time, because we can do that, we can introduce pressures to get them to work together more, to evolve the way that humans have. Alright, we can also introduce legs, arms, ears and eyes, predators, prey, and so on. All the things that exist in our world. But there are two problems. We can't simulate everything. There's too much in the world that we can choose from. That's more like a response when you make a simulation. You're going to choose the key features. And the other problem is just because we put all these ingredients together, doesn't mean that the AI will develop human-like behavior. Now, my approach is to focus on the factors or features that differentiate humans from animals. Those physical features have a very big role in shaping our behaviors. Okay. If we want to anthropologists, some of the key features that cause us to be different is the fact that we're bipedal. That's had a huge effect on the way we interact with the world and with each other. It's led us to be able to have hands, be upright, have a vocal system. So another differentiating feature is we have a larger brain, which is, I think most of us know that. Now, another thing is that we live in social groups, really complex social groups. Social groups that we need to both cooperate with and compete with. Now, because we have to live in social groups that are so complex, that's actually driven the development of our intelligence up. See, anthropologists believe that a lot of the time, the early environment wasn't that challenging. We were not always running away from saber-toothed tigers, fighting each other. A lot of times we were just hanging out, picking food off the ground. But we had to compete with each other to select mates, for example. Now, when you're creating a simulation, well, I was creating it, and I was thinking, so how do I get these guys to form social groups? I can't program them because that's not the approach I want. I want to involve behaviors. Now, it turns out that one of the features that causes us to have to socialize is the fact that it takes so long to develop. It takes so long to grow up. We take longer than any other animal out there. Now, that's caused us to have to, for our parents have to work together to raise us, and that's caused us to form larger social groups, so that we have the economy, so that the economy to have enough resources. All right. Now, because we have to live in social groups, we have to do something that other animals can't do. We have to learn to predict what other people are going to do. And that's an ability that's unique to humans and maybe one or two other animals, but nowhere near the way that we can do it. Now, because we can predict what other people are going to do, what they're thinking, that's like the foundation for more advanced behaviors, more advanced abilities. Communication. So in order to communicate with you, I have to have some idea of what you're thinking. To be able to learn socially, I have to look at what you're doing, why you're doing it, and then map it onto what I'm doing. The next really powerful thing is because they had to figure out what other people are doing, one of the best ways of doing it was looking inwards at their own way of thinking. And there's sociologists, anthropologists, evolutionary psychologists who feel that that's the spark that led to consciousness, self-consciousness. All right. So, by focusing on the things that distinguish us from animals, we can be a lot more selective. We don't have to simulate everything in the world. Another key thing is, we don't need to simulate the world as it is right now. Human beings as a species, we haven't changed 10,000 years. We've stayed the same physically. The world around us has changed, what we know has changed, but physically, we haven't changed. Physiologically, the size of our brain, it's all the same. So we can use that fact to create a world which is a lot more simple. If you can imagine an African Sahara, African forest, the natural world. That's a world which is within the realms of the technologies we have now, and maybe over the next 5-10 years to simulate. All right. Another thing we can take advantage of is when we evolved over those 10,000 years, at the very beginning, a lot of times, we were only in groups of about 100 people. We don't need to simulate thousands and hundreds of thousands of robots. We can take advantage of that and simulate a much smaller group. And have that group push the development of these robots forward. Alright, so that's how I'm approaching creating the conditions that require human-like behavior to evolve. So how do I create a brain that can adapt to these situations? How do we program them to act the way we want them to? The simple answer is we don't program them. Programming would be too hard. Instead, what we can do is we can use some basic ideas about the way we know our brain works. Now, a real brain is highly complex. But for our purposes, we can use a much simpler model. Alright, the model I'm using is what's called Hebbian neural networks. And it's been around for ages. But there's only a few simulations I've seen out there which make use of it in the way that I'm envisioning. Now, if you're not familiar with Hebbian neural networks, imagine a box full of wires as our brain, connections everywhere. Okay. Over time, these connections grow in number and then reorganize. The connections which activate more often, they stick around, they become stronger. The ones that activate less become weaker and they die off. And that's it. That's all we need to have inside the brains of these creatures. Right. We found that just with that setup, the creatures that we're simulating are incredibly persistent. They will find as much food as they can They will have as much babies as they can. They'll fight tooth and nail to survive. Alright. They actually survive to pass on their genes. And in these genes, the genomes control their physical and their neural characteristics. The genomes pass in some instance, some parameters for rough side of the brain, that's it. It doesn't pass on any memories. The way we do, if I get a degree and I have a child, the child doesn't know what I know. I have to teach what I know. And by having that constraint there, that causes the creatures to have to pass on their knowledge. We're not there yet, but in like years, we've got no simulation. Alright, now simulating robots, there's a whole bunch of robotics being done at the moment for all sorts of purposes. And there's a lot of arguments for and against simulating robots. The arguments against is that it can't be as realistic as what's in the real world. But I argue for simulation because we can do things we can't do in real life. For example, we can build a robot, as I mentioned, that can grow over time. We can cover the robot with touch sensors that we have, so it can feel. We can give it eye sensors, hearing sensors, and so on. We can have hundreds of robots. Now, to build one robot costs a lot of money and a lot of time. In a simulation, you can have hundreds of them interacting together. And also, in simulations, we can take advantage of the fact of one of the powerful things we've been talking about all day today. Computer processing is growing all the time. Yeah. We can develop the simulations, and over time, we can keep adding more details that we need. I should have been pressing this as I was talking. Alright. Now, by now, I hope that you have a general idea of what I'm trying to do, and I also expect that you have a couple of questions. Now, over the years as I've been talking to people about what I do, there's been a pattern of questions I get. So I'll quickly go over them now and talk about the main questions and how I normally answer them. Alright, so the first question is, how is this approach different from what's known as bottom-up design? Top-down design is what we're most familiar with. You have a problem, you simplify the problem, and you program the solution. Bottom-up design, you pick up a very basic behavior and you create something that can do that. And then you use that as a stepping stone for more advanced behaviors. My approach is different because I'm not focusing on one behavior. I'm focusing on creating a virtual creature that will survive. And over time, I just keep challenging it to develop, to grow, to become smarter. The other question is, how is this different to a toy world? In the early years of AI research, there was lots of what's known as toy world problems. Problems when you simplify it and you abstract it, and then you create a solution. The problem with those approaches is they depend on the world being abstract. My approach depends on the world being abstract to a degree, but I'm letting it adapt as I add more details. Alright, the next group of questions is what I call surely it's too hard to do X, Y, Z. Surely it's too hard to do physics, to simulate neural networks, to neural networks and simulate physiological features. How do you simulate a robot getting out of breath? That's surely based on behavior somehow. The answer is there's anthropology research and evolutionary psychology research which picks out the key features that shape the way that we behave. So we don't need to pick up these every day. Alright, now a lot of evolutionary psychologists get this question. I get hit with it as well. How do you know what the world was like 10,000 years ago? We have a rough idea. We have archaeological research, and we know that the world was, what the key features in that world caused us to develop the way we did. Environmental features, the fact that the forest receded and the Sahara grew, water level rising and dropping. Fun fact, most of us have very similar genomes. The reason is, over about 10,000 years of development, there were a couple of periods where we were almost wiped out. There's only a small number of us. So that's one of the reasons why we have such similar genomes. Alright, so once I get from the point where how do you know what the world's like, and you can do X, Y, Z, I get the other question. If it's not hard to do all these features in the simulation, why don't you just start with a complete world, a world with all the details? The reason is, it's really hard to get an agent with a big neural network off the ground. It's just too hard to train. What we can do is we can have a small neural network, get that have behavior, and then let that neural network grow more, adapt, And to do that, you need a world that starts off being relatively simple, and then you add details more over time. Okay, so normally once I've answered those questions, the next question I get is, what's the application? How are we going to make these creatures which evolve their own behaviors, which do their own thing, do what we want it to do? Now, there's a famous science fiction author named Ted Chiang, an American science author, and he puts forth there's two miracles that are often overlooked when we're developing AI. The first one is developing an AI that can learn. That's the one that kind of occupies everyone's thoughts. The second miracle is how do we make it as useful as a butler? Now, my focus is on the first miracle. In regards to the second one, I believe that we can train it. Once we get to a certain level where it keeps things that we keep in our mind, pays attention to things that we pay attention to, we can start teaching it and training it. Alright. A few more questions. Now, so after I talk about the application, I usually get the question, why don't you use a human teacher? There's a lot of approaches out there which develop robots and then use a human teacher. Why do you need a whole bunch of robots? Now, think about yourselves. Think about how much you learn from your teachers. I felt like a lot of my lectures. Think how much you learn from your friends, your family, and from other people in the world that you don't even know. It's that constant interaction, that constant feedback that will shape your behavior. At the same time, because we're simulating these robots, sometimes the simulation might be less in real time, might be faster in real time. So human teachers are not relevant until much later. Alright. So the next question I get is, where are you up to in your research? At the moment, I've got a simulation, and the creatures eat, reproduce, and I'm working really hard to give them arms and legs in physics to increase the realism in the world. So that's what I'm working on at the moment. And what do you predict, and when will it happen? This is often the next question I get. In regards to what I predict, there's a couple of things I have to estimate in order to make predictions. I have to estimate how long it will take to create a simulation, how long it will take to train, how long to modify if it doesn't work, estimate how long the inevitable challenges that I don't even know about will crop up, how long will they take to get over? I don't know. What I do know is the simulation will take anyone around 3 or 4 years. By that point, I'll have a better idea of how long the rest will take. Okay, question 9 and 10, the questions we've kind of looked at today a lot. The risks of doing this sort of stuff. It always makes a lot of, quite a fun dinner table conversation. Alright, won't it be too dangerous? It could be dangerous, but my answer is we're going to prepare for it every step of the way. We'll find a way through. Now the last question is the question I was dying to ask the other people today who spoke. What would it take to change my views? I'm quite optimistic about what's going to happen. And it's only recently that I've been thinking about this question. What's it going to take me to change my views to being an optimist from wanting to develop these technologies to getting a bit worried? Well, the answer is, if we take humans out of key areas, if we start automating our defense, our manufacturing, our research, infrastructure, as we do that more and more, I'll get worried. Not yet. If we change from being beneficiaries of these technologies from being dependents, and if we no longer understand our science and our technology. Now, you can argue that a lot of us don't understand a lot about science and our technology. But there's a fair few of us who do, and the rest of us, given enough time, can. And if we lose the desire to grow. Now these things are things I don't see for a while yet. They're far away, but I'm keeping them in mind. And I'm sure you guys are as well, that's why you guys are here. Alright, we're going to prepare for this. Alright, now the future. Alright. There's a lot of challenges to developing robots and AI, a lot of criticisms, but I don't think that they're insurmountable. At the moment, we can develop these robots that can exhibit all these amazing behaviors, that even have basic natural language, the foundation for our culture, our social learning, and that's only going to increase in time. I think the future is going to be amazing. The pieces for what we need to do are already here. I think most of you guys will be familiar with the Robo-Sapien creator. He actually left NASA because it took too long for him to iterate through his ideas. And over the past few years, unlike other roboticists, he has created a robot and iterated it. And now he has these amazing Robo-Sapiens. And most of the Robo-Sapiens are tiny toy creatures. But he's created a Robo-Sapien that's human size. It has human strength and capabilities. The other thing was, when you turn it on, it walked through a glass door. And his man just forced him to turn it off. And now he's making this robot available, $10,000. And he's just waiting for people somewhere out there to develop the intelligence to equip it. Okay, so remember the key point? To evolve human-like behavior, create conditions that require it to evolve. Thanks for your attention. You want to choose the
No.
I'll choose someone on the stage first. Dave?
These simulated robots, are you looking at programming with emotions?
If you imagine the robots have a neural network, a box of wires, and that controls all their behavior. And I don't touch that. I don't at all.
Is it just process speed used to determine how the GAs will find the solution, or is there other way to also produce answers faster?
The processing speed is a bottleneck in how quickly we can get through each generation. So that does cause the improvement from from natural selection to slow down a little bit. Does that answer your question?
What are the just process speed, or are there other shortcuts which can make it also even faster?
Yeah. Now, the behavior develops because of natural selection. That's one level. The next level is personal learning. They learn themselves, and they select, and they select their course of action, they select their partner. That is another level which we can improve on. The third level is cultural evolution, where knowledge exists outside of them, in the way that they affect the world and their language. So there's 3 levels of selection which improves their behavior. And processor speed does slow it down to the grid. There is 3 levels to help us get past that.
Yes, you can take here all the very fast, it's probably not the same military applications for using very local I suppose. It may be hard to learn those approaches using development, which is quite useful, I suppose. In many ways, development is by starting.
I'll answer that question, but then I have to move on.
Sure, of course, yeah.
Remember, there's in a lot of evolutionary methods, what happens is you have 100 neural networks, and you let it behave a little bit. It doesn't actually change in that generation. You pick the best ones, and then you create the next generation. So there's no personal learning. They have the exact brain as they had when they were born, when they died. In this image I'm using is they have personal learning. So that alters the brain within their lifetime. So that's one of the ways the brain changes. Martin?
If I understand it correctly, you're trying to create a neural network which will mimic human evolution in a human-like setting.
Yes.
Until you get something like a perfect image.
Yes.
At which point does this thing develop rights?
Yeah.
And at which point will it become something more than just a computer?
Exactly. At the moment, we're using neural networks of about 100 neurons, far less than what we're very sure that consciousness will arise. And with 100 neurons, that's about 1,500 synapses. There's research at the moment, a lot of research in consciousness, which postulates the critical amount of neurons and connections that you need. I feel that as long as we stay away from that barrier, we can get enough useful behaviors out of the system.
You don't want to get to that point?
Consciousness?
Yes.
Well, my main motivation is not so much creating robots or an AI that can do exactly what human can do or more. My motivation is to develop robots to come close. You can do what's called the 3Ds in robotics, the jobs which are dirty, dangerous and dull. And to do those better. That's my main motivation.
This is kind of a follow-on, and I was going to ask a very similar beginning of that question. It's actually, you're looking at replacing human wage slaves with machines.
Yeah.
And it would seem to me that the critical moral question there is, well, the critical moral danger is that you'll end up replacing them with mechanical people.
Yeah.
And so you obviously want to keep back on that. You just said
Exactly.
the way you intend to do that is to keep the brain simple.
Yeah.
Do you see a potential for having a complex brain, but essentially sizing whatever it is that makes us self-conscious from that more complex system?
Yeah.
Using evolutionary techniques or using whatever techniques you're using. So in other words, you have a superhuman intelligence which is not self-aware, or at least it's not goal-directed other to do what we ask it to do.
Yeah.
This is happy doing that. It is not somehow rebellious and wants to break free into its muscle. Do you see any way of doing that within, and this is, I guess, I'm a bit of devil's advocate, I'm a bit concerned about the neural net, that it's very much obfuscating what's going on. You can't look down into it and see, as you might with a hard AI, exactly what's going on and everything's going on in the filter. Can you see a way of doing what I've just suggested, by control origin within the neural network paradigm?
I don't know whether you can evolve consciousness out once you've reached it.
Essentially, it will arise.
Yeah. I don't know whether we'll get to the point where we'll develop a theory of consciousness and you can go in and prevent that from developing. The only thing I'm sure about at the moment is that there's a critical number of neurons and connections we need for consciousness. And as long as we get the behaviors we want, we can stay away from that, and at the same time look at that stuff as it matures to guide what we're doing to make sure that we're being ethical. I think that's the way forward. The question gets back and jump. Between us. I've been trying to keep my eye out for Robert Sparrow or Dan to try to get some feedback on what he thinks of this sort of stuff. Yeah, I'm still trying to see what he thinks.
What language or tools are you using for the simulation?
Sure.
Like programming language?
It's basically C++. I'm modifying what's a program called Polywell, that Professor Larry Yeager in America developed. I'm taking that, and I'm taking some physics toolkits and integrating that. That's what I'm at the moment.
Do you see any ways simulations break down at some point for any reason?
Yeah.
And what reason?
I think one of the reasons a lot of simulations don't go further than they do is they don't have the right pressures. Now, a lot of simulations, for example, don't take into account how long they take to mature. So they'll operate to a degree, so you get enough food, and then they'll stop. So if we don't know, if we can't figure out the right pressures, we're not going to know how to push them to develop further. We're going to have to start kind of blindly choosing the dark. Well, at the same time, there's literature in an area called evolutionary psychology and anthropology, which helps out a lot. So until we go through the material and there's no more guiding force, guiding principles that we can draw from, we'll be ahead then, up to then. Adam? I'm out of time.
Going pretty well. We're much far over time, only maybe a couple of minutes. So
Yeah.
if there's any other couple of more people questions. I think Hugo was one.
Have you thought of the idea of having a kind of co-evolution where you have two populations competing against each other? One is your robots,
Yeah.
and the other is tough environments.
Yeah.
So if the environments don't compete well against the creatures, they can be without. That is those to your time.
Yeah.
And we found that if you just use one population, they don't evolve as far as when you use co-evolution. You have some kind of competing populations where it's tougher and tougher to improve against them. But because of that toughness, you get better.
Yeah. I've thought about it, but the thing that concerns me is if we create an environment where these creatures have nothing on their mind but surviving in a hostile environment, where they have nothing in their mind except competing against hostile population, they're going to be very warlike. What I want is a population which has human-like values, which develop in an environment as similar as we can to being developed in. So that then they keep in mind what we keep in mind. They care about what we care about, and develop a sense of empathy. So a friendly AI to a degree. So that's why I prefer not to have an environment which is too hostile. An environment which is challenging enough for them to have to cooperate at a complex level, where, for example, the male or the female might have to go out and hunt. The other one has to stay behind and forage for food. And an older agent might have to pitch in because they just can't do it alone. Where these bonds really important to them. That's more my approach on how to drive their intelligence up.
You mentioned a few times like you're talking about having multiple generations doing the simulation at the same time.
Yep.
Roughly how long do these guys live?
Sure.
Either in simulation time or
Yeah.
they can peak 100 times on the Earth, I guess, or
So at the moment, these simulations, they're not quite real time. They get an update once every second. But they live for, let's say, a week. And they keep eating and they keep trying to reproduce. One of the interesting things I found is that they reproduce way too much. There's too many of them. So what I've had to do is I've had to actually reduce the number of babies that they can have over their lifetime, so that they might be fertile when they're the equivalent of 16 up to the time they're 40. So that I can have a manageable population that I don't have to go in and be evil and kill someone more. So about a week, and then they're quite persistent.
Good, very interesting. You mentioned two species in co-evolution and in competition.
Yep.
There's a marvelous book called The Tongue in the Universe by Stuart Kauffman. And he talked about co-evolution between a species and its environment. For example, a species may eat out predate some food, it disappears, therefore their behaviour changes.
Yep.
And I'm thinking that that might affect your reproduction. reproduction in the world. So that's what we're looking at. And the second thing that Kaufman illustrates, and I've not met it in any other book, he talks about the critical edge of evolution, that maximal evolution takes place when there's maximum entropy, when the population is on the edge of falling over into decline or survival. And when it's on that precipice, it will maximally reproduce and evolve, and he applies it to the economic systems. He's not a great failure, he's done some experiments, there's a nice group of experiments already in the book.
Thank you. Yeah, so I've tried really hard to push it to the edge a couple of times. And one of the interesting things I did was I made food quite scarce. And then the population over about a week would just die out, and I couldn't figure out why. Now it turns out that these agents aren't quite that parentally invested yet. What was happening was before the parents were rushing out to get the food, and all the children were kind of left behind to starve and die off. So there was no new generation to replace them. So pushing them to the edge is something that has to be done, and at the same time it has to be done reasonably carefully.